Base launch trajectory countdown net. Pad is clear.
10, 9, 8.
Launch auto sequence
7,
has started.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go for launch.
Vehicle is supersonic.
Stage separation confirmed. Dragon, separation confirmed. Stage 1 is transonic. Landing legs have deployed. And Falcon 9 has landed.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of Intelsat Galaxy 31 and 32. Go Falcon 9.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
M1D chamber pressure is nominal.
Successful liftoff of Falcon 9 from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. We're carrying the Intelsat Galaxy 31 and 32 payloads to orbit. Now, we've just begun throttling down the Merlin 1D engines in preparation for maximum dynamic pressure. And we've also begun to tilt the engines. That's called gimbaling, and that's why we've begun to move horizontally away from the launch pad. That maneuver is called a gravity turn.
Max Q.
So call out there for max Q, that's the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure. Now briefly going back to the gravity turn, we are still heading up. As you can see, the speed and altitude are increasing, but we're also heading away from the launch pad. And we do that because a rocket needs to go about 17,500 miles an hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back to planet Earth. So we'll keep speeding up the vehicle to get to orbit. Now coming up in about a minute, we've got 3 events back to back. That is main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then second engine start number 1. Main engine cutoff is where we'll shut down all 9 of the Merlin 1D engines on the first stage. That's in preparation for stage separation, where the first stage will push off the second stage, and then second engine start number 1, where we'll ignite the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage. So again, MECO, main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then SES-1. This is a view from the first stage camera looking down the body of the first stage towards planet Earth. You can see the Merlin 1D's plume expanding as the density gets less and less.
MECO. Stage separation confirmed. And vac ignition. Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Awesome. So MECO, stage sep, and second engine start complete. Now coming up next in about 20 or so seconds will be fairing separation. Again, both of these fairing halves having flown 5 times before today's mission. And some great views of planet Earth behind the Merlin vacuum engine.
Fairing separation confirmed.
So there is successful fairing separation. We'll be attempting to recover those fairing halves again once they make their way back to Earth on a recovery vessel named Bob.
Acquisition of signal.
You can actually see one of the fairing halves in frame there as it goes back to planet Earth. We actually got our first glimpse of the payload as well today. As a reminder, we are not attempting landing on our first stage. So the next major milestone will be second engine cutoff number 1. That's about 4 minutes from now. And again, the reason we're not attempting to recover our first stage today is because today's payload needed a little more performance out of Falcon 9. And so we had to use the propellants that we would normally use for the entry burn and landing burn to instead take the payload to orbit. Now, the first of these two burns is taking us into what's called a parking orbit. So that is a roughly circular orbit that we'll be going into before we take a second burn later on in today's broadcast. And ultimately, the payloads will be going to what's called a geostationary transfer orbit before they continue their mission onto geostationary orbit. So for this first burn, the Merlin vacuum engine is continuing to burn and take the second stage and the payloads to orbit. Now, the Merlin vacuum engine is extremely similar to the Merlin 1D engines. It does feature more redundancy and a much larger expansion nozzle, and that allows us to maximize the efficiency of the burn in space. And the reason that expansion nozzle makes the burn more efficient is because we're able to expand the gases further in the vacuum of space than we are on the ground. On the ground, we've got about 14 pounds per square inch of pressure from the atmosphere pushing down on us. And so as you try to expand a gas, you have to keep the pressure matching with that atmospheric pressure. And that means you can't get as much push out of the gas out of the nozzle. But in the vacuum of space, we don't have to contend with that. And so we can actually get more of the force out of the expanding propellant to push the second stage, and that increases the efficiency. And Merlin Vacuum operates with the highest efficiency ever made for an American hydrocarbon rocket engine.
Expected loss of signal, Cape Canaveral. MVAC shutdown.
There is successful confirmation of SECO-1. Today, the next major milestone will be ignition of our Merlin vacuum engine again. That's for second engine start number 2, expected in about 26 minutes. About 26 minutes into the mission. So, until then, please enjoy the space tunes and the views from space. We'll see you back at about T+26. Welcome back to our webcast coverage of the Falcon 9 mission carrying the Galaxy 31 and 32 satellites for our customer Intelsat. Now, at this point, we are the second ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine, which will carry the second stage and the Galaxy 31 and 32 payloads into the targeted geostationary transfer orbit.
MVAC ignition.
There is successful startup of the Merlin vacuum engine. Now, this burn will last just a little bit over a minute. And I mentioned that we're going to a geostationary transfer orbit. So to the first orbit that we put the payloads into today is called a parking orbit. That was a slightly elliptical orbit. Now, the payloads are still attached to the stage at this point, so they're coming along for the ride. And once we are in this highly elliptical orbit around our planet, we will transition into payload separation. So there's a successful shutdown of the Merlin vacuum engine. We're going to take a look at the orbital parameters with the ground team.
Nominal orbit insertion.
So while we wait, we're going to jump back into a coast phase. So hopefully enjoy the views when we get them back and enjoy the space tunes. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, welcome to our webcast coverage for Intelsat's Galaxy 31 and 32 mission. Intelsat has the most extensive space and ground network combined worldwide, with over 50 satellites, 60 teleports, and point of presence on the ground, as well as 100,000 miles of fiber. Now, we're coming up shortly, about 10 seconds to go before deployment of the first of our 2 payloads aboard today.
Confirmed separation on first payload.
And there is successful separation of the Galaxy 32 satellite and final deployment of today's mission of the Galaxy 31 payload. That's scheduled to happen in about 5 minutes. So we'll see you back here at T+38. Welcome back to our coverage. We're nearing the end of today's mission for our customer Intelsat. Now, about 5 minutes ago, we deployed the G-32 satellite, and we're awaiting deployment of the second and final payload on today's mission, G-31, which you can see on your screen there.
Payload 2 separation confirmed.
And there is successful separation of the G-31 satellite off to continue its mission. So all of us here at SpaceX want to give a big thank you to our customer Intelsat for entrusting us with today's mission. We also want to thank the Range and the Federal Aviation Administration for their support. And before we sign off, SpaceX observed Veterans Day this past Friday, and we wanted to take this time to thank all of our veterans for their service. Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in and for your continued support, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and weekend.